Okay, all right. Welcome to our Q&A. This is such an honor for me to be with this lovely group of women. We have Franco Stevens, founder of Curve Magazine, and we have Jen Rainin, who is co-director, co-producer of the film. And we have Rivka Beth Meadow, also co-director, co-producer, and producer and talent, Andrea Pino Silva. Thank you so much for being here, y'all. I just want to say that I loved the film. I watched it, and then as soon as my wife got home from running errands, I sat her down and said, cancel everything, need to watch it, watch this film, and I watched it again. And we are just obsessed. It's so well made. Congratulations on a fantastic film. And I feel like it's my duty to specifically say thank you, Franco, on behalf of all lesbians and queer women for creating this magazine and positively shaping our lives as we've grown up, and for taking the risk and having the courage to put lesbian on the front cover of this magazine, because I truly feel like, that choice destigmatized that word and laid this wonderful foundation of, today queer women to be able to embrace the word and be free to diversify their identities. So thank you for that gift. It's an honor to be with all of you. So my first question is, on that note, how do you think, and feel free to jump in, anyone, how do you feel like the word lesbian has evolved from making the magazine, and also if it applies like making the movie?
Well, I think it became clear that, we needed to find out what the terminology people were embracing these days, because I feel like it's changed a lot since, I was a 21-year-old lesbian making a magazine. And, we went to several different festivals and meetings and asked women across the country what they preferred. So that was one subject that we talked about in the movie. And I feel like that could almost be a whole movie on its own, is how we identify ourselves.
Yeah, I like it when you talk about what it was like in the 80s and 90s, and why the word lesbian was really a big deal, and why it was such a huge deal to put that word on the cover of the magazine.
Oh yeah, women thought I was crazy. Everyone thought I was crazy for wanting to put the word lesbian on the cover, because it meant every time you went to the newsstand, because that's where we got our publications, every time you went to the newsstand, you were basically coming out. You were buying a magazine that said lesbian on the front cover. And they told me that, that would put it out of business immediately, even before I got a chance to, get some legs.
They were wrong.
They were wrong.
Who knew it could be such a political and radical act to do that? I mean, it's crazy.
So in making the movie, like I said, we went around the country and to Canada figuring out what women want. And Andrea, I met up with her in Vegas. Yeah. And she's a lot younger than we are, and I realized that she was a force in the queer community as well as everything else she does. So I'd like to hear what she has to say about how she views the terminology of today.
Yeah, it's really funny. So I wore this shirt at Klexicon, and I haven't worn it really since. So I was just thinking of it fondly because I saw the film again last night. And, Franco is the first person who has ever told me that I scream lesbian when I walk up to somebody, which I was so complimented by. And I say this because my own journey in claiming the word lesbian, the label queer, hasn't always been very straightforward. A lot of it for me is a lot of my activism was around gender-based violence and sexual assault, and predominantly in women's spaces where you couldn't really talk about being queer. And I think for me, really a lot of the pushback was because I did work in sexual violence, a lot of people assumed that my being queer mean that I hated men, that perhaps I was queer because of sexual violence. So I had a really hard time finding my own footing in the movement. And really, in connecting with other activists, I realized that there are so many queer women across movements. I mean, across literally every movement, you will find a queer woman either in the front of the pack at a protest, or behind the scenes making sure everything runs, because queer women make things, actually work, right? I mean, we literally lead movements, we keep them afloat. And really, ClexaCon was such an incredible experience because, especially being there, because the word lesbian is something that I think has in the past been used for exclusion, and really by a small but loud few, predominantly white women, that have kept people out of the community, and not just trans women, but also queer women more broadly, bi women, pan women, and has been used for exclusivity. I was really curious for that conversation, and it was really beautiful to see that a lot of women have reclaimed the label and have actually refused not just transphobia, but also white supremacy and how lesbian has been used to uphold those derogatory values, right? So I think it's something that was really powerful to see. And also for me, the word lesbian was the only word that I've had to communicate with my family in Spanish. I mean, you can't really talk about queerness with my family. They don't really understand the concept, but I think it's been the word that I've been able to talk about the way that I love. So I think it's something that, while historically has been used for exclusivity, I think there's a brand new generation that has reclaimed the word lesbian and has refused those values that have kept so many people out of our community.
Hey, can we see your shirt?
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Your shirt, that's why I'm wearing
There
this.
it
Ah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, the angle's always like, I was like, where's the right angle? But yes, I do wear my values and wear it in the background as well too. I do want to also say too that I think that everyone here agrees, at least those of us in the team, that when we think of the word lesbian, we think of queer women. We're talking about all women who feel a connection, and actually not just women, but all people, regardless of how they identify gender-wise, that feel a kinship with queer women spaces, which I think is actually really beautiful. And we saw that at ClexaCon, and also within our own conversations, that there's this new movement to open up our spaces and to talk about the power of queer women spaces and how they are different from larger LGBT spaces, for us to talk about not only what it's like for us to be queer, but also to be women, to be people who love women, people who are in women's spaces, and kind of those added barriers, and also those really powerful stories, and how they have carried our movement behind the scenes for so long and rarely have gotten the attention that is very much needed.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I loved the conversation in the film where everyone talks about what it means to be a lesbian. And it's so funny because I'm a filmmaker and activist, and I've always considered myself queer because I'm scared of the word lesbian. And I feel like after watching this movie, I wanted to jump up and be like, I'm a lesbian. Like, it felt like the movie was doing that thing, like kind of reclaiming it in a way and reframing it. And I think there's a lot of power in that for the movie as well.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I know we're going to do a Q&A, but do the people watching have the ability to send in comments?
Yeah, I have a little chat thing that, okay. Well, yeah, I already got a yes, thumbs up.
Yeah, I just wondered because if, it's still a journey that I'm going through to figure out what the terminology that women prefer. And if they feel comfortable, I would love for them to, send something in the chat just saying, queer or lesbian or dyke or straight ally or whatever it is that they are and their age. That would be, if you feel comfortable doing that, that would be really helpful.
Okay, I'll let you know when they come in.
Okay.
The other thing I love about the film is the message, like, if you want something, take action and do something. And my question is, like, what are actions that young queer people can do today that improve visibility for lesbians?
Oh man, I'd love to hear from Rivka on this one. We talk about this a lot, and as Frank and I have been working on the Curve Foundation and launching that, that's something that we consider quite a bit as well. Rivka, how would you answer that?
You know how I'm going to answer that. I'm going to say I think that young queer people will ask themselves, what do I need? Like, much like Franco did. She was asking herself, what don't I have? She needed a guide to being a lesbian, and she didn't know. She's like, not, very young out in San Francisco and just coming on the scene. So I think that it's like, we couldn't be prescriptive. I think one thing we learned through making this film was that everybody's answer is slightly different. It's just that everybody's got an incredible voice to share, and that we need all your voices. I know that's like super, maybe a little too kumbaya, but it's really true. Like, we each have our own realms in which we are gifted and we're inspired. And I feel like there's been a lot of conversation around self-care, especially in response to this pandemic, and a lot of us feel like we are just on all the time in every realm. And so kind of stepping forward where we're able, and then stepping back and letting other folks step in, I think is that too broad of an answer? I think everyone's answer is slightly different. And
Yeah.
I think being visible, Andrea said that, being visible is really the most important way to show up.
Cool. All right, this question is for Jen and Franco. Is this the first project that you've worked on together, and what was it like? Because you're married, right?
Yeah, other than raising our kids. Yeah.
Working as a married couple on a film project like this.
Well, I must say it was strange because I was opening up everything, to Jen, like, okay, you can look through my personal archives and my, all the letters that I've saved from, who knows where, and pictures of me doing crazy stuff. And, I trusted her to have my best interest at heart, but she also asked some really tough questions that I wouldn't have answered for anybody else. She made me feel comfortable, and Rivka definitely was there to reassure me at every time. But we did raise some kids together. One's leaving for college today in a few hours, so work together pretty effectively.
We have. It's true. Yeah, it was a huge gift for me, I would say. I mean, this is such a weird comparison, but I think about what came out of this process for me in terms of this relationship, and I think about when my father passed away, and people came from all places of his life, all the corners, and they came out and they told me stories about him that I would never have found out before. I got to know him in a much richer way, and I got that opportunity with this extraordinary woman I'm spending my life with now. Like, I really got to dig in and talk with folks, opened up in really wonderful ways. I also think that the reason that they did that is out of massive amount of respect for what she's done in the world, and wanting to make sure that this story is not this little quiet, hidden secret anymore. I mean, your contribution to the world has been really significant, and it's exciting to see it start to get out there.
Thanks. I mean, I didn't do it alone, that's for sure.
It's a remarkable story. I feel like somebody needs to write a screenplay about it and do a narrative feature, because I just can't believe I don't know if everyone's seen the film, but just, the horse races, like, there's so much stuff that's just it's gold of how this came to be.
Mm-hmm. Funny you should say that. There may be a screenplay in the offing.
Ooh,
perhaps.
Okay.
Lisa, who should play me?
Oh boy,
Good question.
that's a great question. Let me think on that.
Yeah.
I'll think on it. Did you like watching yourself, this film being made about your life, did you learn anything new, was anything surprising to you?
Oh, it was so weird watching a film about yourself. I actually didn't see it until we premiered the final edition. I didn't see until we premiered at Frameline in San Francisco at a drive-in with 1,000 cars. So those people watched it right along with me, and I was really proud of the work the filmmakers did, an all-women crew. And I learned that it's okay to be vulnerable and to show people that side of me, because that's something that I never did. When I had to go to a loan shark, I didn't tell anybody. I just, did what I needed to do, brought the money back. I remember Deb St. John, who was the art director, was the photo editor at the time, just like, where did you get that big bag of cash? I was like, yeah, it's all good. So letting people know the struggles that it takes to make something like Curve, especially to the young people out there, don't be afraid to go for it. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? You could, file for bankruptcy, and that'll be off your record in about 7 years, which is something that was always in the back of my mind.
Absolutely. So where does the fate of the magazine stand today?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
And I want people to see the movie, so I don't want to give anything away.
I mean, the magazine exists.
Yeah.
And
so for those of you who might not know, Deneuve, then Curve magazine, has been through its ups and downs, and publishing is in a strange state right now. It's hard to keep anything going. In print, younger people, especially younger queer people, don't get their information from print anymore. The magazine has been doing a great job of producing content online since the pandemic started, live streaming events. And as Jen said, we're starting the Curve Foundation, which will continue on with the mission of the magazine to give a voice to queer women. And we're really, really excited about that, to be able to fund, queer women's voices and stories is really a gift.
And it's what Curve's always been about.
Yeah.
Women's culture.
Yeah. Can you talk more about that? So it's the Curve Foundation, right? And it's to amplify queer voices. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like what that means?
Well, it's specifically to amplify queer women's voices.
Right. Okay.
And we're keeping with the women because that's, my original mission. And women are so often forgotten out of the bigger queer picture. And the foundation will launch in the next couple of months, and it will, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say.
I know. Well, look, it's still under development. We're working in community, bringing in as many voices as we can to help us figure out the right path forward and how best to support women who are telling their stories.
Cool. Yeah.
And by the way, I'm like, whoever was saying Ellen Page should play me. Love the idea to say.
Noted.
Those bears.
Nice.
I was thinking this would be a good time for Andrea to talk a little bit about the Impact campaign too, because it's connected, right, with the Curve Foundation and the film and kind of the rollout, and especially, when we're talking about queer women, right? And so, Andrea, will you talk a little bit about Beyond the Rainbow conversation?
Yeah, totally. And actually going a little bit further back about what queer people can do right now. I mean, frankly, showing up for all of the Black Lives Matter protests. And I think that oftentimes when we think about what queer people can do, we oftentimes think of a very limited framework of the LGBT movement. But literally every issue is an LGBT issue. And I think especially as people who have been historically marginalized, it is our responsibility to show up even when we don't feel personally attacked. And I think that this pride was really something, right? And I think for a lot of queer people, myself included, I had to sit and think of what I wanted this pride to be for myself, because there were no festivals, there were no rainbows everywhere. And it also coincided with George Floyd's murder, right? And I will say that it was probably the most impactful pride I've ever experienced. I mean, the entire city was lit up with anger, but also pride, right? Pride of showing up for your neighbors. And it was beautiful, right? And really I brought back that experience to the team about, what it would mean for us to have a very intentional discussion of what is our responsibility as queer storytellers. And really, it's about thinking how it is that we can elevate the people in our community who historically haven't heard of, right? What is it about, even myself, like, what is it that I have to choose between my being a lesbian, my being a Latina, my being a survivor, my being a lesbian? Like, what is it about women and us having to pick one hat, in particular, those of us who are people of color, right? So we talked about, for our impact campaign, actually be very, very intentional about kind of expanding on what queer womanhood is, right? Going beyond just the word lesbian, going beyond just even gender, right? How it is that we can create more intentional discussions about gender identity within the queer framework. And also talk about, being very intentional about race and the fact that not everyone has that coming out journey that's very linear. Like for me, for example, again, I don't even have language within my community in Spanish talk about being queer, right? Even my journey out of the closet, there are many people in my family that affirm me and are wonderful, others who have no idea about my being queer, right? So we talked about how it is that we can actually have those intentional discussions, right? How it is that we can talk about, even language and how we talk about queer identity, how it's not just coming out of the closet, right? How it's not even just, butch or femme, right? And I think that's something that, for me has been a big source of pain, right? Because again, Franco being the first person to tell me that, right? Because I look this way, right? I look this way and people don't think I'm queer. I've been in queer spaces. People have asked me, is this a phase for me, right? And these are really intentional conversations where if that person were a cis white man, we call that sexism, we call homophobia, but it happens in our own spaces, right? So how it is that we can talk about making our spaces safer, being more intentional about, ending white supremacy in our spaces because it happens in our spaces, being more intentional about ability, the fact that so many pride events are simply not accessible for a lot of people, frankly, and not even folks who are physically disabled, but also folks who will become disabled. What it means that pride ends in your 20s, it shouldn't, right? So how it is that we can be more intentional about disability as well, how we can be more intentional about folks who simply don't feel safe, right? It's not just the festivals. It's not just the bacchanalia that we associate with pride, because again, we also have a lot of folks who have issues with substance abuse. So again, these are all really intentional conversations, right? All these intersecting layers and things that our community deals with that are all in the big umbrella of queer womanhood. So really our impact campaign is going to look at those different layers, and also how those of us that have certain levels of privilege, whether we pass as white, I'm afforded whiteness, we're able-bodied, we're people who have stable jobs, and how it is that we can show up for folks who are literally still are trying to survive right now. Right? I think especially now during COVID, there are so many people in our community who do not have the safety of being in their home right now, not even having a home, not having access to a steady paycheck. And it's really time for us right now as queer people to show up for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's an amazing mission. How can people help with that impact campaign?
So we're actually going to have a pretty intentional discussion series going forward in the fall, and actually within our future educational tour as we go to college campuses. But really right now, watching the film is great, and kind of engaging with this bigger conversation of queer womanhood. Sharing links, to future screenings would be really great for us. Just simply asking folks to watch the film if it's coming near them has been really great. And I think in the future, keeping a head out in our social media for our future discussion series, we're hoping to have some really cool folks show up to have these, difficult but really intentional conversations. And again, for us, like very much like Franco's goal, like our goal is to build community, to build that intentional community, and that community that makes us better allies for folks within our spaces.
Yeah.
The most impactful thing you can do right now for us is tell everyone to watch the film. That's it.
Shout it.
You can sign up. Yeah, you can sign up on our mailing list at our website, which is curvemagmovie.com, and I'll put it in the chat.
And someone said they loved the Facebook page for Out of the Curve.
Well, it's such a great way for us to engage with community and to support other queer women's organizations and activists. And so we spend a lot of time curating that page and bringing out lots and lots of content for the community there.
Yeah, I was going to talk about community next, actually, because I've been talking to a lot of friends ever since I knew I was going to moderate this Q&A, and I've just been asking people, did you grow up with Curve? And everybody resoundingly is like, yes, like, whether you got the manila envelope, subscription, and, I think the magazine like really offered a sense of community, especially, you know, growing up in a small town in Montana or other rural places where you didn't have that community, you know. And so it saddens me that there's like a possible end to the magazine. But I think that there's still a deep desire for community for queer women and lesbians. And I think Andrea just answered some of that, but where else do you see like that community happening for queer women and lesbians? Because that's a desire. I mean, there's no lesbian bars anymore, which is so sad. Have you seen it anywhere else?
Lisa, I really think that you know, is online now,
Yeah.
but it's hard to maneuver this big World Wide Web and find the place where you belong. I really applaud the women that do podcasts and, you know, that are influencers, and now everyone has that ability that they can jump on and have their voices heard, which when I started AGLIFF magazine, that wasn't the case. I mean, there was, you could have another lesbian living in your town and not have any clue whatsoever. You couldn't meet somebody if you were, you know, not in the major hubs. And even then it was hard.
And now we have these kinds of conferences like Clexicon, like Lesbians Who Tech, and then of course we've got the Dinah and Aqua Girl, you know, and events like that bring us together in community in lots of different ways. So I think there's a lot to be said for those kinds of gatherings as well.
There's something I just learned about, which is Queer Soup Night. I don't know if anybody's done that yet. I just learned about it like a week ago, and it's not on because of the pandemic, but it started off in New York, and just people gathering and really talking about like what kind of causes we can collectively support. You know, Andrea was talking about really working intersectionally and showing up intersectionally for other movements and people in other movements. And that's, you know, absolutely something that we want to do. But yeah, Queer Soup Night, I think, was talking about, they have chapters, and I know there's one in Oakland. I'm in Oakland, California, one in New York, Portland. They're popping up all over because people do want to get together and people do want to have like collective impact.
So I will say really quickly too, that I think is like, it's like a difficult conversation, but frankly, like, I think the more and more time I spent in mainstream LGBT spaces, the less I wanted to be there. And I say that because a lot of these spaces were predominantly led by white gay men. And I mean, there's so many women that I know that have been harassed, that have just dealt with sexism, frankly, who have just been like, kind of like oogled at, right? And that was something that I never really felt safe in a lot of these gay bars, so I stopped going, right? And I think for a long time I felt that, you know, if I wanted to feel safe, I couldn't be in you know, LGBTQ spaces. And I started meeting a bunch of other queer women in just general activist spaces, all of whom had the exact same experience, so they simply weren't there. So I think it's actually a very important discussion, right? Like, why is it that lesbian bars are disappearing? You know, why is it that we don't have a lot of mainstream spaces owned by queer women, right? It's because, frankly, they're still white men, right? They're still white men who have much more access to capital. And that's a very real discussion. And I will also say too, that women get critiqued much more ruthlessly, right? And we are also much more willing to show up and answer our critiques, whereas a lot of gay men-led organizations simply don't care. So they continue getting funding, right? They're much more likely to get the corporate funds, much more likely to get the alcohol funds, whereas a lot of women's led organizations are like, you know, we're not going to take corporate funding. We're not going to like take money from large alcohol organizations because of our sober clientele. Like, they're much more willing to donate and open up their spaces. And that says a lot about the values of queer women led spaces, right? And I will say that, again, I have made so many community friends, like in just like racial justice spaces, in other, you know, in like housing insecurity, organizing spaces. I mean, quite literally, you go to an organizing space, you will find queer people, right? And I think, again, this is a lot about like where women have to go. Like, we have to make our own spaces because we aren't given our spaces, right? We have to literally claim them. So I will say, like, there are so many of us right? And I think perhaps us thinking beyond just LGBTQ spaces and thinking about how it is that we can have queer spaces across movements, you know, and across industries, right? And I think they exist, right? So I will say again, you know, what Jen and Franco were saying, like there are so many incredible spaces online. I mean, quite literally fandoms are something. I mean, like Shira, for example, like the amount of interest around Shira, like overnight with young people, like creating these stories about what Shira meant for them. There's a lot of really amazing work being done. Now, a lot of it is online, right? And a lot of it is kind of beyond just what we consider lesbian spaces, but I think is actually kind of hopeful, right? We kind of want every space to be a lesbian space. So I think that's very much where we're headed.
Yeah. We need a lot more women writing checks. That's what I always say. Especially in the film industry, you know, like we need people, we need women writing checks and being decision makers. That's huge, especially queer women.
Yep.
Yeah. And women employing more women.
Yeah, exactly. I have a question. Can you talk a little bit, Jen, about the score?
Oh,
The score is so good.
yes. Although I think I actually have to let Rivka take this because watching her reaction when Michelle takes the cello, agreed to do this. I mean, and I will just start this off by saying Michelle did the score. We approached her originally asking for an interview because she had been on the cover of Deneuve magazine. And at first she responded and said, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. And then when she realized we were asking for an interview and not to score, she responded and said she was kind of disappointed. And Rivka and I went, oh, really? Oh, all yours, Rivka. Tell us the story.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, like you set it up. So we reached back out and we said, you know, well, would you be interested in talking about doing our score? And she wrote back, she said, absolutely, trying to do more of that. She had just done some scoring for Queen Sugar. And so it went from there. We had a phone call during which I had to, I think, keep my mute button on so she couldn't hear me hyperventilating. But then we closed the deal, and it was phenomenal being able to work with her on that project. She just has such an expansive knowledge of music and style, and since she was there in so many of those spaces, it's just permeated. She really got it, and she got it, you know, on a storytelling level, which was phenomenal to be able to work with her on this.
She was incredibly generous and warm with us. I'm just beyond grateful for the opportunity that she gave us.
Yeah. Okay, we have a really good question from Todd. I wonder if Franco can speak a little about her activism within the disability movement and how her experience in lesbian rights shaped her work there.
Thanks, Todd. If you've seen the movie, you know that I'm in a wheelchair, and I had an accident in the CURB offices that led me to be permanently disabled. And I deal with a lot of pain every day. And, you know, I feel like this movie was more of a coming out. We're being attacked by it. By a bug. Was a coming out of my disability, because although I wrote about it in the magazine, you know, seeing disabled people in film is different, and it shows other disabled women that they can, you know, and should be out and proud with their disability. And it was a painful thing for me to talk about in the movie, because although I see myself as an activist, I feel like I could be doing more for the disabled community than I have. Right now, I think my main goal with my disability activism is not taking no for an answer, which is what I learned from CURB. When somebody tells you something can't be done, you know, find out why and make a change. Like if that theater that my movie can premiere in doesn't allow me as the disabled person in a film to get up on stage or even get in the theater, you know, that's not right. The ADA is not a new law. It's 30 years old. I love when I go into a restaurant and they're like, yeah, the bathroom's not, you know, accessible. but we're grandfathered in. I'm like, there's no such thing as being grandfathered in. You know, it's like, it's not okay. You know, it's not okay to not be accepting of everyone. And I get choked up because, you know, it's near and dear to my heart. And I see, you know, the people in my disability community struggling, especially in times where, you know, the whole country is struggling. A lot of disabled people have it 10 times worse than I do, 10 times worse than, you know, the average American does. They can't work on an everyday basis, or maybe they can. And a lot of their, you know, things that they depend on, like they have to have a healthcare worker come in to help them. I just had 2 friends pass because their healthcare worker came in and had COVID and didn't know it. And they both died.
Wow, sorry to hear that.
They could not be away from their caregivers. So, you know, hopefully I can get more involved with the activism around disability in film and, you know, speaking up for disability rights when I go into a place and things are not right. You know, for me to have to go into a restaurant or a place of public access and call in advance every single time, and then for somebody to tell me, oh yeah, it's totally accessible, and then you get there and I'm like, this is not totally accessible. And I wait outside while my friends are, you know, inside having fun. It's a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think accessibility in film is a big focus for a lot of people right now, filmmakers. And I was talking to some people recently, and one of the actresses said, who has a disability, it's like they can figure out how to, you know, fly in these planes and make these gigantic sets, but they can't figure out how to make it accessible for a wheelchair to get a, you know, like it's crazy where the priorities are with disability in film.
Yeah.
So
it's really important to us in making this film also that we make it as accessible as possible as well. So,
yeah.
You know, we created closed captioning and audio descriptors as well to make sure that the widest possible audience would be able to watch this film and enjoy it with community.
Yeah. Well, we have to wrap this up. It was so lovely. Thank you so much for making this film. I will be telling everyone about it. Where can people see this film next?
Rivka, you want to answer that one?
No, how about you? Why don't you tell everyone?
All right, well, we are, oh my goodness, we've got, go to curvemagmovie.com. You'll see the list of upcoming screenings. We're pretty excited to be going to Outfest in a couple of weeks. We'll be at a drive-in theater there. And we're just, you know, I just want to say we're super honored to be participating in aGLIFF. Like this was a big deal for us, a really big deal. We love this organization and we're really grateful to be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's my favorite festival on the circuit. So I love aGLIFF. All right, thanks y'all. Thank you so much for your work and activism, all of you. It's a beautiful movie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Yep.